Prime Minister Keir Starmer is insisting that two-tier policing is not an issue in the United Kingdom. Well, I hate to break it to him, but the British people have a rather long memory and oodles of video evidence to the contrary. So I thought today we would go through the abundant examples of two-tier policing enacted by Keir Starmer and his predecessors throughout the last at least a decade. And it's unsurprising that people have taken note, and when they legitimize violence and riots as the only means of redress, which we do not advise you do, by the way, because we don't want anyone to be arrested, it's very silly, but when they only address rioting from ethnic minorities, Muslims, and immigrants, then it's unsurprising that the English working class take notice. Now, if you are planning to go to any of these protests, again, we don't advise it because even if you're going down to express solidarity with the grieving parents of the Southport massacre by the second-generation son of Rwandan immigrants, not a Welshman, or if you're going down to complain about immigration, as we all do, absolutely legal and illegal alike, beware, because the anticipated protests between 30 and 100 reported for tonight is going to be met with 6,000 riot officers deployed as part of Starmer's standing army. Now, as I made this point on GB yesterday and Carl reiterated on our roundtable, you don't call it an army unless you're going to war with someone. And given the two-tier policing enacted with the Muslim militias now turning out that MPs are denying exist or making excuses for, it seems the war has been declared against the anti-mass immigration white working class English. So don't give them an excuse to lock you up, because they definitely want to. Now, LBC are reporting here that they've said 5,950 officers have been mobilized to deal with the unrest. And according to sources, this figure represents 30% of all trained riot officers across the country. Of course, they're going to be spread very thin if it's not just happening in London, like it did in 2011. They're going to struggle to contain this. So the violence, I fear, is going to continue. Still no mention in this article of the Muslim mobs attacking pubs, pedestrians, and parked cars, but there is an image in this article that, again, underscores just how bad the two-tier policing is, of these chaps. Have a look. A group of lads, just lads,
typical British lads.
Yep, typical British lads about to go on the rubber dinghy rapids, I'm sure, give members of the EDL a message from Birmingham. Just a message in balaclavas, flipping the bird at the camera that Lord knows where they got this photo from.
You can tell how desperate they are for some kind of grand enemy and how scattershot the messaging is being, given that they're still hammering this EDL button when everybody has pointed out that they've not been around for years.
They were disbanded in 2013. As far as I know, Mr. Robinson went to prison because he punched a Nazi and they burned a Nazi flag. So they've been both irrelevant and counter-signaling the far right. Whenever they say far right, we know they mean Nazi. They're hoping that you fill in the gaps for them.
As far as I'm aware as well, the last time anything related to the EDL is that someone was in 2017 or 2018 trying to organise some kind of protest in their name and had to cancel it because no one showed up.
Well, also,
that's how little of a factor they've been for 10 years.
In 2013, they used counter-terror legislation to ban an EDL march going through London. Why they didn't do this for the pro-Palestine demonstrations that happened every weekend in Westminster since October the 7th, who knows?
Priorities.
Yeah.
I mean, the very fact that the two-tier question is being asked is a major loss for the government.
Absolutely. They've lost control of the narrative.
There would be no such narrative circulating if it didn't match people's experience in the least.
Quite, exactly.
People would completely think that this is just, a silly theory. They would say silly conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it's lining up with their intuitions, and you cannot tell people to deny the evidence of their own eyes and ears without significant enforcement costs causing your narrative power to drop off. This isn't stopping them, though. Mark Rowley, Met Commissioner, got pulled into one of two Cobra meetings this week. Keir Starmer also convened the cabinet in secret despite Parliament being in recess. So he's not putting the question to MPs, but he is instructing his cabinet how to govern the country while being utterly inflexible to the fact that the far right, whatever boogeyman those are solely responsible for the unrest scene. When someone asked Mark Rowley about why there is a perception of two-tier policing, is he going to do anything about it, he walked past and batted the microphone at the hand of the reporter. I'm just going to play this clip.
Are we going to end two-tier policing, sir?
Excellent. Petulant child. Just what I want to see from the head of the Met Police.
This is a political statement. This is a political statement. It's just, I'm not talking to you. Anyone who dares to suggest this.
But also, what else is a political statement? He's made this morning. He said that even questioning two-tier policing is complete nonsense and puts officers' lives at risk. You know what I think puts officers' lives at risk, Mark? Is creating this justified sense of two-tier policing with the litany of examples. And let's start with one that is a dark stain on the Met's urge to be politically impartial in 2020. That's Black Lives Matter. Now remember, Keir Starmer decided that it was his top priority to take the knee as a photo op with Deputy Leader Angela Rayner at the time where $2 billion of property damage, multiple lives were being claimed, and entire cities were set ablaze, and Seattle was taken over by the Chaz and Chop in America. And parallel protests / riots happened in the UK, not to the same scale, of course. People, fortunately, didn't lose their lives, but there were scraps and scuffles. The Churchill statue had to be boarded up because they were afraid of it being defaced.
Why were they happening in Britain in the first place when BLM was supposed to be addressing supposedly American-specific issues?
Yes, it's a colonial import, as it were. Keir Starmer thought that this needed this gesture and also a down-the-line video expressing sympathy with the reasons why people were protesting against systemic racism, something else that's completely unproven.
You know, there's an old saying, it's lost in the ages. It says, never let a good opportunity to virtue signal go to waste. That's exactly what happens here.
Yeah, I think Keir Starmer's made that the flagship policy of his campaign leading up to the election. It wasn't Starmer, though. Wasn't the only one. The Met Police themselves decided to do this. I'm going to mute that because it's just urban babble. It's utterly indecipherable. This is outside of Downing Street, by the way. Police officer just decides to take the knee.
Very brave of him.
There we go. Now, was this officer...
Do you want to shine his shoes while you're down there?
Yeah. Was this officer reprimanded for this? Interestingly not. No. At that time, Scotland Yard released a statement saying, taking the knee is a personal decision, not a political decision, Stelios, and should individual officers at their own discretion, where it was safe to do so, and it doesn't interfere with their operational duties, decide to kneel on one knee with Londoners, they are free to do so.
Is he an MP or something right now? Or could he be one of the prospective ones?
Oh, what, this fella?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be shocked if it disbarred him. I don't know what's happened to this particular officer. I do know that he wasn't dropped from the Met for doing this because they decide to endorse a gesture which shows fealty with an organisation that have said they are trained Marxists and trained organisers, aka race communists. So the British police, happy, showing solidarity with race communists. But don't be worried, there's no two-tier policing, especially not in sentencing, when this chap tries to light fire to the Union Jack on the cenotaph, the war memorial. Bear in mind, this is a BLM activist. He was 19 years old, Astrafel sang, and what do you think he got for this?
Oh, a parade.
In spirit, yeah. He got a 2-year conditional discharge and was told to pay £340 in costs. So absolutely nothing. A very minor fine for desecrating a war memorial. But then you must be thinking, okay, well, hang on a minute. This is BLM. This has got absolutely nothing to do with Islam.
As well, I think we should point out that this is criminal property damage, or certainly the attempt for criminal property damage. And I'm aware of somebody recently, slightly younger than this chap, who has just gone down for criminal property damage.
Who's that?
That's a young chap who's gone for 2 months.
Oh, the first photo of the gentleman charged who looks like a face merger between myself and Harrison Pitt for some strange reason.
The ideal Zoomer.
Yes.
The platonic.
So, funny that all of us around here are happy to say, don't loot a Greggs, don't loot a Lush, don't smash up personal property, don't start fights with the police, don't beat up random black people. And yet when they do it, they don't get any prison time or harsh sentencing. So again, I know it's not about hypocrisy, it's about hierarchy. They just want to unilaterally punish the English, but the idea that there's not a two-tier going on here,
has there been any police investigation into that gang of Muslims who beat up the one gentleman outside of the pub? That descended on him like a feral mob.
One of the Birmingham officials said, and I quote, that it was nothing more severe than what you'd see on a usual Saturday night.
Now, I know Birmingham can be a bit rough.
But Muslims don't usually go to pubs on a Saturday night either.
No, I've actually been to a pub on Birmingham on a Saturday night before, and it's never seen anything like that. But I do know that the poor chap was barred from the pub.
Right.
So
I-
justice has been served.
I disagree with you that it is not about hypocrisy, because it's about the institutionalization of hypocrisy. All
No.
wokeness is hypocrisy
No, so they
institutionalized.
no, they don't see us
'cause-
as human. That's the point. It's not hypocritical because they don't see us as human.
Well, I think we're. Let me express my point. I think you will agree with me. So it's all about dividing the population into oppressor and oppressed groups and treating the so-called oppressors as second-class citizens. That's all it is. That's all the framing that they're practicing, that they are using. So yeah, there is no just two-tier policing. There's just a two-tier system.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why appeals to hypocrisy actually won't reach these people, because they know that they're punishing you as an underclass. That's the entire purpose of the system. So it's meant to be hierarchical. Just saying the left are the real racists won't get us anywhere. But this is why people are angry. This is what they keep seeing. Okay, well, here's another example of the police allying with, let's say, an Islamist mob this time. Anyone remember this, when a 14-year-old autistic boy dropped a copy of the Quran and had to do a show trial with local Muslims with his mum? The police orchestrated it and took part on the panel. They knew this boy and his mother had received death threats. His 14-year-old British boy fled his home, went into hiding, like the Batley Grammar School teacher, who is still in hiding, and who the police, I don't think, arrested any of the people threatening the teacher outside the school. He bought a copy of the Bible and was teased after mentioning it to his friends. Good lad. They were playing Call of Duty, and when the boy lost, it was also agreed that as a forfeit, he should buy a copy of the Quran and bring it to his high school. It's Kettlethorpe High School in Wakefield, West Yorkshire. And then when his friend took the Quran and started reading from it aloud, he knocked it out of his hands. And this desecration of a holy book that he bought on Amazon as a dare led to the local Muslim community sending him death threats. He was suspended from the school, along with 3 other pupils. Police began investigating it and recording it as a hate incident. So the police are complicit in this. And then the mother found herself pleading for forgiveness, saying, in his defense, he is autistic. He doesn't always realize what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. He's a very silly boy.
Did this take place in the local school?
I believe it took place in the local mosque.
Oh, that makes sense. This image that we've got up on screen here, what does this look like to you? Because it looks to me a lot like a hostage situation.
Yes, it looks essentially like a parallel government and legal system enacting vengeance on an outsider and threatening the life of a child. And for this, the police officer in question decided to, Chief Inspector Horton here of West Yorkshire Police, decided to take part, to diffuse community tensions. And they feel they have to do this because there is the recognition that this community, Muslims, do not subject themselves to British law. So there is a two-tier. There's a parallel society going on. The police feel the need to negotiate rather than subject to equal application of the law, as they would if the English made death threats to a 14-year-old Muslim boy. Obviously, as well, 5 Pillars here shared the footage with glee, basically. So, yeah, the Muslim community are celebrating at this win that they subjected this woman and her son to a struggle session in the local mosque.
I will also add that this is one of the weird implications of the restorative approach to justice. Just as whenever there has been wrongdoing, let's put both rivals, sit on the same table, and they just find it out. You can't enforce the law in this way in a whole country. It's just a pie in the sky.
The premise is that it's not that a moral wrong has been committed by the criminal. It's that civilization failed to educate and enrich the criminal enough, so he turned to crime. So therefore, you just need an open dialogue between the aggrieved and the perpetrator. It's a fundamentally insane and egalitarian anthropology that leads more crime to be committed.
Sorry, is she having to wear a head covering because she's in a mosque? Oh,
yes.
well, you know you're on even ground then, don't you?
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Fair point. Okay, well another example. Speaking of the Islamic community, how about the Palestine riots that I've already mentioned? Now, we've covered this many times on the show, but here's footage of them firing fireworks just openly in the street that they actually... They shot these at police, they shot these at police horses, they attacked police. Again, something that's not mentioned anytime that we talk about the far-right thug riots that are currently going on, where police officers are getting into scuffles and scrapes with various drunk football lads and deciding to go after and physically attack other bystanders who haven't done anything wrong. I wonder why people don't like the police very much. And then Martin Daubney, when he was down there, do you remember when Parliament was in session talking about the ceasefire debate and they decided to project from the river to the sea on the other side of the tower?
Yes, I remember this.
Martin Daubney walked around and just found the projector, and he reported it to the Met Police and said, look, they're projecting a slogan of genocidal intent on behalf of Hamas onto the building connected to Parliament while Parliament's in session. Do you not want to turn that off? And the Met Police just said, can't do anything. Even though they knew who set it up, they knew where it was. Nobody was arrested. Nobody was charged.
Well, you can't even just unplug the thing?
Nope, they didn't. They weren't bothered. They weren't bothered whatsoever. So again, another example of two-tier policing. Remember the Hare Hills riots in Leeds that we also covered recently? This is a video of such events. Fiery but mostly peaceful, I'm sure. Burning police cars, burning buses. Now, this was because Roma gypsies had abandoned and led to the injury of their own children, and the children were taken away from their safety and put with a relative of the family. It wasn't even that they were abducted and put into foster care or a government system or something. And they decided that in response to their children being removed for their own safety, they would burn down their own neighborhood with other assorted immigrant groups. Now, I raise this because if we want to apply the law fairly and we don't want any violence, and we don't want to send the message that violence is the only means of getting redress for political causes, why did you give the kids back? They gave the kids back, and the reason given during a family court hearing by her Honour, Judge Helen Trotter Jackson, was it is important for everyone to focus on the children's welfare and taking the temperature down in this case. We don't want the community that we know will burn down their own city to keep doing it, so we're going to re-endanger the children. That just sends the message that the riots work, clearly. Because funnily enough, there were only 27 arrests for this whole thing that went on multiple days. Bear in mind, as of recording today, this is Wednesday, the 7th, there are 420 arrests and 100 people charged from all the protests after Southport. And the majority of those are white English. I doubt they're going to be the Muslims that are carrying blades and attacking random white people in cars. So again, another bit of two-tier policing. Clear example from this as well. Talk TV decided to do an interview with Nicola Wilcox. Do you remember the video of the white woman saying to the police, why aren't you arresting them? Why are you not doing that? It circulated at the time. It was very famous. What she'd done is actually she went out to give the police officers ice lollies.
Oh, yes, I heard about this morning.
Yes. And they decided to arrest her for inciting racial hatred when she said, arrest the people that are burning it down, tell them to go home.
Well, the scariest thing that I heard about this was, I don't know if you can play any of this clip, but she's explaining how she went to the police and the police told her to go away, go home. But she'd just come out of her own home and all of the people around her had started to put their hoods up and behave threateningly around her. So she actually couldn't, because she didn't want them all to see where she was going so they would know where she lived.
Because they just set fire to a bus, so it's likely they could firebomb her home. It's a completely valid concern. And then she said she was in the police station for, I think it's that 13 hours. And at the end of it, they couldn't find anything on her. But the police officer said, because we've arrested you, we have to charge you. That's not how that works in this system. They've made a scapegoat of this woman who has done nothing wrong, was trying to do the right thing, was trying to prevent the violent rioters from attacking property and people. And so they have charged her with inciting racial hatred, and now she has to do a 2-hour racial justice awareness course. So a struggle session because she didn't want her own neighborhood burned down.
And because she wanted to help a pair of police officers.
Yes. Again, the white English who live in these communities are penalized when they don't do anything wrong, but the actual violent rioters, if they are not white, not English, and particularly Muslim, get off scot-free. Yes, that's the perception of two-tier policing in this country. Speaking of Muslims that get off scot-free, Manchester Airport. I'm not going to be able to play this footage. This is the CCTV footage of when the police officers decided to wrestle two chaps to the ground, because it turns out, as well done to Richard Tyson Lee Anderson predicted, these chaps started a fight. And the reason they started the fight, as they're saying in a press conference that's happened the other day, is because their mum was on a plane and was being racially abused by a cruel man on the plane from Kuwait, notably white country. He was yelling in Arabic as well. And so they thought that, therefore, because the police wanted to search their mum on the way back, that this was a good excuse to break the nose of a female police officer and start unprovoked fights with armed police officers. It's like, yeah, the guy that kicked him in the face thought he'd taken his gun, so he had to put him out quickly. He acted bravely, but instead, before this came out, the local Muslim community, who don't operate on the same sense of justice as you or I, they privilege ethnic and religious solidarity over a sense of fairness and the due impartiality of the law, they turned out to the local police station and decided to agitate outside of it until those two men were released. And Then their lawyer went on the airwaves and decided to use exaggerated claims, saying it was an attempted assassination. Bear in mind, their lawyer, their former lawyer now, Ahmed Yaqub, was an independent Gaza Islamic candidate in Birmingham. And after all of this, they then have the gall, because the men still haven't been charged, by the way. The CCTV's out. We saw that they did wrong. We saw they were the provocateurs. We saw that they broke a policewoman's nose. They haven't been charged because of community tensions, I'm sure. They had the gall to go and do a press conference saying that the family have been subject to horrific racist abuse. They punched a female police officer in the face. She had lasting injuries. Why are these two men allowed to do this, allowed to host this show trial as ambassadors of a community not subject to the same law as the English community? Because there's a two-tier. Again. Okay, let's go to more recent events before I wrap up. Richard Tice tweeting out the thugs that intimidated a Sky News reporter by saying "Free Palestine, F the EDL, F the Zionists," throwing up his middle finger and gesturing his intent to discharge weapons, while other men were loitering around a McDonald's with bladed weapons in full shot and puncturing the tyres of the news van as well. Well, they couldn't properly puncture the tyres because they still drove away because they're stupid. Tice points this out, and Jess Phillips, not a friend of the show, decidedly, decides to use stronger language here than she did when condemning Liz Truss for being interviewed by me. Use stronger language to condemn Liz Truss than here. She just says, oh, it's all right, these Muslims are just showing up to defend their community from the EDL. So it's fine for them to carry bladed weapons. It's fine for them to intimidate female reporters just because of this phantom threat of the EDL that never materialized.
It's incredible. There's something implicit in this statement, is that if you send Muslims anywhere, they are guaranteed and expected to show up with weapons and begin shouting abuse at women. Interesting perspective to take, Jess.
Well, gathering from her acceptance speech on election night, where she was heckled and harassed by those men, nondescript men, idiots, it would be fair to assess that. Yeah, it's just that Jess doesn't want to admit the problem because these are a large number of her constituents and she's hanging onto her seat by a very thin margin. It's almost like you imported this problem and this is of your own making.
The whole thing here is really interesting because they didn't want the good word that the mainstream media was putting on for them. So, for instance, she's trying to, in a way, put in a good word.
Run cover.
Yeah, and they went out and they completely hijacked what was happening, us shouting about, Palestine, and
it's almost like they have really
gesturing.
poor impulse control for some reason.
And then they went to slash the tires of the Sky News van.
Yeah, because they're barbarians, and it's really dishonest for media and politicians to run cover for that, but they're only running cover because they're Islamic and not white. And so there is a two-tier happening here. I'll speed through the last bits just to go through it. This happened yesterday. You can go and watch the clip in your own time. I got invited onto GB News, and a former Labour MP and member of European Parliament, Sean Simon, denied that these were happening. Then he was played the video evidence of the Muslims attacking the pub, the Swan in Birmingham. And then he said it's not happening at scale. And then more instances were played. And then he said, don't worry though, I read a book by a police officer that said, of course, policing is always in tiers because you can't police everything exactly the same. So it's not happening. It is happening, but not enough. It is happening, and it's a good thing that it's happening. Glad that we've caught up on this dialectic. He also denied the English existed, so that's
But the Welsh, the Scottish, and the Irish do, presumably.
And the Palestinians, clearly.
Do the Cornish exist in this framework? I'm confused. They want independence as well, don't they?
To get on Josh's good side, I'll say no.
Oh, okay, that's good.
And then this is, okay, again, more blatant examples. Muslim counter-protesters are going up to the police, and the police are saying, don't worry, we are here to protect you. That is the message they've received from Keir Starmer, who stood up and gave an address to the nation twice, not because of the Southport stabbings. This is really important. He didn't feel the need to show verbal solidarity with the grieving parents. Instead, he got up twice to blame the far right and dedicate 28 million to round-the-clock protection for mosques, while taking away the winter fuel allowance for the pensioners that voted for him. And this has alienated even my boomer grandparents, who decided, against all sense, to still vote Labour. Very unwise. And then there was this as well. A police liaison, a sort of community support officer, told a bunch of Muslims who were armed at the time to discard your weapons at the mosque. One, rendering the local mosque a kind of armoury, but two, if the EDL really were still existing, do you think a white police officer would have gone up to them and said, look lads, I know you've got bricks and bats, drop them off at Tommy Robinson's house and come collect them later? No. They know there is a community here that does not respect the rule of law. Now, let's contrast this to the St. George's Day Parade, where some passing moron decided to throw a pint towards the police, and so they decided to kettle everyone in, drive police horses through the crowd where children were present, and crack heads with batons, just because a few football lads were gathering. And one of them got particularly rowdy. And there is an on-the-ground perspective from Charlie Sampson, a friend of mine. He was interviewed by New Culture Forum. You can go and see that in your own time. Recommend listening. And also contrast it to how these people are going to be locked up. So all of these people that have been censored, 100, probably going to get expedited prison time. The court's going to work round the clock to lock them up, right? Well, what about the prison space? Because apparently 88,225 people are in prison in England and Wales, so there's less than 700 places remaining. Well, as we mentioned before, Keir Starmer's doing his best Bane impression by letting all the inmates of Arkham Asylum out, because he's letting people out that have served only 40% of their sentence. So that's up to 40,000 convicts to be released early. Don't worry, no sexual abusers or domestic abusers, just literal murderers. Mother, a teenage boy killed in a machete attack. It's Gordon Galt. He's 14. Poor lad here, right? He was in hospital for about 9 days. Was killed by these two enterprising chaps. Their names are Lawson Natty, and the other one is down here somewhere. Carlos Nito. Ah, yes, really enriching the country by being here. Gordon Galt, died in Newcastle in November 2022, and at the trial, they were convicted of manslaughter and unlawful wounding. Nito was jailed for 9 years and 2 months. Natty was only handed 2 years and 8 months after their sentencing hearing in March. And Natty, the chap at the top here, with the dead-eyed scare of remorselessness.
The trustable face.
Yeah, quite. This is the face of diverse and multicultural Britain. He's going to be let out over this weekend. After killing your 14-year-old boy. For completely no reason whatsoever.
Basically being given a pat on the back and saying, good job, let's get back out there.
To ensure we can lock up more English people, specifically. Because they're not policing the Muslim rights. They're denying they exist.
What's the next thing that you could do after this to do more to condone, essentially, what he did? And say, we don't punish you for these things.
Give him a medal?
Yeah, they basically go, oh, one Englishman down, good job.
Yeah, which he'll then melt down to fashion into a new machete to have a duel in Southend, I suppose. Don't worry, Ministry of Justice spokesperson has told Mail Online that any violent offender with a sentence under 4 years will be eligible for early release.
Oh, thank God.
So more of them. They're celebrating this.
All of these sentences, for some people, are just ridiculously low.
Yes. You should be not only spending life in prison. I would advocate bringing back the death penalty for murderers like this. But the Labour Party think they should be out on the street, and instead, people caught up in the protests for immigration, even if they weren't violent, should be locked up. Even if they were inciting it online, which will include presumably Tommy Robinson, who's abroad and said don't go to these protests, and Nigel Farage. And maybe us, we're under the eye of Sauron. And this is why, to finish off and dovetail perfectly into your segment, Stelios, Keir Starmer has lost narrative control because now Elon Musk is using the term two-tier Keir. Yes, there is a two-tier justice system in the UK. It's reflected in the media, by politicians, and by the police. And this is why the riots will continue, sadly. Again, we don't condone them, but they will probably continue because now, not only are the Muslim community not listening to the police as an authority on the law, but the British people have also lost complete trust in the police to serve their interests and apply the law fairly. Get back to applying the law fairly, and it might well stop.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, we recently put out a video, the England riots, where we talked about the situation, believe it or not, in England. And if you want to see what else we're doing, all the other work, you don't want to miss anything, you can follow us on Twitter. We post links to everything we're putting out. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.